We about had to beat her to get her a bottle of aspirin.
All right.
Couldn't get her to take a shot or nothing, and now she gives them.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's typical, really. That's typical.
All right.
When she first said she was going to nursing school, I was like, huh? Is this somebody that showed up I don't know?
I briefly thought about moving up to get my nurse's thing, but no, just briefly.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I don't have
Where'd
it.
boss
It's in my
go?
other purse.
Oh, okay.
Mm, well, we'll wait a few minutes.
Oh, so sorry.
That's all right. We got a
I
second.
put everything in a smaller purse.
Well, I'm glad everybody could be here with the gas shortages and runs and
Hey, we were in
all that
the
craziness.
news today, and almost every gas station we went by was empty.
Yep. I came by Thomas Crossroads and it's all gone.
Tonight,
So,
40-something.
I
Look.
sat in line 40 minutes, but we
Wow.
never get gas.
yeah.
Did you
She
really?
says everything in LaGrange
Range
is
was
wide
open.
open.
I mean,
Yeah.
I got gas just like that. It's
Really?
$2.77.
I paid $3.19.
It's that Chatty Women Noonan group on Facebook that's
I
causing
got it
the
up there at
chaos.
that Walmart on top of the hill in LaGrange, past the Toyota place, heading towards the hospital.
See,
But
we're
it's-
we're going out of town Saturday.
Well,
Kind of like, wow.
maybe a one-way trip there. Yeah, my neighbors are supposed to leave Tuesday to go out to Wyoming, and they're like,
I know, I'm worried
Well,
about what's
David
going
said,
on.
Marie talked to David a while ago, or earlier, and David said, they ain't a problem out west.
it's just the
They
East
know.
Coast.
Yeah.
It,
It's all this thing on TV, the media is making everybody panic.
apparently, once you get past Alabama, it clears up, you know.
Yeah.
And even Alabama's pretty good, so it's just us and I think North Carolina they said is the worst.
It heads up
Virginia
Yeah.
toward that, up towards Virginia.
The East
Yeah,
Coast kind of panics, yeah.
We ain't driving up to Jason's.
Hopefully it will solve itself soon.
Well, they just opened up the pipeline today,
Yeah, but it'll take a couple days to.
yeah.
So that's all right. That's all right.
But they still don't give the people an excuse to jack up the price, though. That's
Just don't give them an excuse to raise the prices.
Tell
That's
them.
right.
Tell them. As I filled up for 3 something a gallon.
That's ridiculous.
It was painful.
$3.19
But-
is what I paid today.
I think I paid
You
3
can call,
right at
you
3.
can call in on them, you know, for gouging, they can get them in trouble.
All right. Well, today we've got an exciting day. We'll be starting Mark chapter 6, verse 45. We'll be picking up right after Jesus fed the 5,000. And if we have time, we will go into chapter 7. So we will see how far the Lord will let us go today. But we're really getting into the meat of Mark. So Mark is 16 chapters. We're at end of chapter 6, going into chapter 7, and we're really getting into some cool stuff, some things with a lot of theological meaning, a lot of practical meaning for us. And I think when we look at these things as we dig into them and try to find, turn over every stone, I think we'll find some cool things. But let's start with this next section in Mark chapter 6, and we'll start at verses 45, and we'll go all the way through the end of the chapter, verse, 56. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, and while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up to the mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on the land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost, and they cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They ran throughout the whole region and carried the sick on mats to whoever they heard he was. to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages, towns, or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. And we talked last week about Jesus feeding the 5,000 and how this was in all the Gospels, all 4 Gospels. Jesus walking on water, to me, is probably like the most flamboyant miracle, right? I mean, it's just show-stopping, right? If somebody does this seems like it should be the most famous of the miracles, but yet it's not recorded in all 4 Gospels. It's recorded in 3. Luke doesn't mention it. So anybody find that just odd?
Well, it's not a common thing, that's for sure.
I mean, like when you think, like, name a miracle of Jesus. Like what's it? Man on the Street segment for the Late Show, right? Name a miracle of Jesus. I would imagine walking on water would probably be the top answer, or Family Feud if you're like that, right? 100 people were surveyed. How many? Jesus walking on water. Got to be the number 1 answer. I mean, what else would it? Any other thoughts? Like
Heal the blind, heal the sick, raise the dead.
He did a
raising the
lot.
dead. Lazarus would probably be
he did a
up
lot.
there.
Casting out demons.
Yep,
Casting out demons.
Surprised how many people would say turning water into wine.
Yeah. Well, you got those people out there, and that's cool. But this is but it's not the focus, right? In fact, let's keep in context here where Jesus walking on water is in relation to the story. It's after Jesus feeding the 5,000. That's where Mark puts it, and he puts it there for a reason. Well, we'll get to the reason in a sec, but notice he says in verse 52, for they had not understood about the loaves. He's tying it back. This is why Mark put it there. He's tying it back to loaves. These are 2 halves of the same whole, of the same lesson. So I know in our Bibles we've got these convenient little headers, right? Jesus feeds the 5,000, Jesus walks on the water. But we need to take it in context what the writer was trying to say, that what the lesson that the writer is trying to convey to us, right? He's teaching us something. So let's go into that. So we start off in verse 45. Immediately, right? We see this Markism again. He's moving the story along. Boom, 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 boom. Immediately. Immediately after what? Let's keep in context. This was after the 5,000, right? Yeah, they picked up the bread. So the 5,000 were fed. They picked up the bread. Time to go, right? There's no Baptist tradition where we all stand around for an hour saying goodbye. Go, now. Jesus made his disciples get on the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. And after leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Crowd control. Now, this is a big crowd. Okay? You got one guy dismissing 5,000. We can understand, like, the disciples, right? He's kind of the head of this group. Okay? So you guys go on ahead. I'll take care of this, and I'll catch up to you. And that kind of blends in with the beginning of feeding the 5,000, where he's like, I know you're tired. Come with me. Let's get some rest. And they get ambushed by this group. So he's still taking care of them. But this 5,000, this crowd, we don't see it here in Mark, but in John, we start to see what's happening. If you read the account in John, the people are wanting him. They are wanting Jesus to become king, right? They're really wanting him to take authority. They want Jesus to be the leader. And it says in John, they're about to take him by force. Kind of unclear, like, how do you force somebody to be king? It's kind of unclear, but they're really pressuring him. And so it looks like that Jesus is kind of dispersing this before it gets out of hand, right? Kind of sympathetic, right? I mean, if you think about the context, you're a Jew, you're in Roman-occupied territory, they're treating you terribly, right? You've been prophesied for a king, you know you have a great heritage of David and Saul, right? You've seen the glory days. You're past that. You want a king. And you got this guy who just is performing miracles and healings, and he just fed you out of nothing, right? Seems to be a smart guy. Seems to be, pretty cool guy. Let's take him. But Jesus stops all that in his place. He stops it, and he sends them away, and he goes up to the mountainside to pray. Jesus was on a mission. When we look at Isaiah, was it 53, I think especially? Yes, there are prophecies about the Messiah coming. Yes, there are prophecies about the Messiah being the king. We know in the New Testament, Revelation, right? Jesus coming again. But Isaiah specifically talks about this period of this person also going through sorrows and persecution and pain and suffering for our namesakes. They miss that part. So this is almost like we know because we've got the rest of the book here, right? We're ahead of the time. That he wasn't meant to right now come and be the Messiah, so to speak. He was there to pay for the sin debt of the world. He was there to create a, what do you call it? What do I want to say? A way for people to be reconciled to God, right? There's no use in bringing forth a new heaven and the new earth right now, because nobody's going to be in it. So Jesus is a man with a mission. I would also say, and I will, in full disclosure, I was thinking about this on the ride down here. And I came up with this thought at about right after I turned into Luthersville. So I didn't have much time to think about this all the way through. So bear with me. I'll throw this out there. We can discuss it. Maybe it's terrible. When Jesus, you remember when Jesus was anointed, right? He was baptized and the Spirit came down on him. And then it says he went out into the desert and was tempted by Satan, right? We know those temptations. He offered him what? He offered him power and food, and there was something else. I want to say there's three.
Provision like the angels would come and protect.
That's right. Yeah, tempted with power, right? I was thinking that this what we're reading here is almost the fulfillment of those temptations. Because Satan just said it, right? I can do this and I'll give you power. Do this, I'll give you bread, right? Call down the angels. Well, right here we have Jesus creating bread out of nothing, right? He's bending the rules of the universe here. Creation, which was a temptation. Power, he giving him rulership. Well, these people are wanting him to be the ruler, a temptation. And he could, and then we'll see, he comes into the boat and calms the storm, right? Power over nature, let's say. I think we see like the fulfillment of these temptations. What do you think? I thought it was a decent thought. It's a long drive. So, I didn't have full time to think about that, but I thought I was onto something there. Maybe, maybe not. But we do see that, it does seem to be that he was tempted. And the reason he dispersed the crowd and went up to pray was to focus on the mission. Because as human, he would have been tempted. Who's not tempted by power? And if you raise your hand, we know you're lying. So, right? It's totally human, right? But at the same time, like Jesus had his purpose, right? And he was in perfect communion with the Father at the same time. So think about practical application number one. When you're tempted, go to the Lord in prayer, right? Always. You should be there always. right? Maybe practical application 1B, being in prayer, stops you from acting on your temptation, right? They kind of go together. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake. Now, who has a different translation? This is NIV. Is anybody reading from King James or New King James or Lord help you, the Message? Okay. So I think the other translations will say like a couple, they'll translate this into miles, or if you have a really old one like stadia, right? The Greek term. So this is literally, if you read some of the original, it's 25 to 30 stadia into the lake, which is about 2.5, 3 miles. And the lake is only like 5 miles wide. So literally, they're in the middle of the lake. But to give you a context, you're talking about 3 miles-ish into the lake. So they're out there. They're not swimming by the shore. And we'll come to the reason why that's important in a second. And he was alone on the land. So he's still in his solitary spot. Maybe he's finished praying and he's looking out onto the lake. And he saw the disciples straining at the oars. He saw the disciples straining at the oars, this is verse 48, because the wind was against them. And then it says, shortly before dawn, he went out to them.
Okay.
It's okay. Just say.
Can you see somebody struggling at 2 miles?
Okay. Good question. Can you? Let's say even if you're up, elevated. You got what, 12 guys in a 20-foot boat? Maybe. Can you see them? Like, I don't think you can.
If it's 5 miles wide and they're out in the middle, I mean,
Talking like a speck, right? I mean,
technically if you've got, binoculars or a telescope or something, maybe, but
so
realistically,
so the first miracle is he's Superman, right? He's got super eyesight, right? Because it's
Pull that out, it's 4 o'clock in the morning.
It's nighttime.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
pitch
it's night.
black.
It's
Yeah.
pitch dark.
it's black.
Because my book says about the fourth watch of the night.
Yeah, fourth watch of the night, which would have been somewhere between
It's
3
late.
and 6 in the morning.
It's late.
The fourth watch is the last watch. So they divided the night into 4 watches, right, for guards, and the fourth watch would have been the last watch.
How
So
do you
this,
see in the dark?
We don't, he does.
yeah.
Yes.
So maybe what we're saying see is with a spiritual sense,
Yeah.
right? He sensed it, maybe would be a better word, although that's the way it's written. Jesus has super eyesight, right? I would consider this to be the first miracle, right? He knew somehow. He saw without seeing,
He probably heard them.
heard them. He probably heard some. Well,
Yeah, probably
it said
heard.
it was windy though, and
Yeah,
wind
that's
creates
true.
some
It was
noise.
windy. Yeah, that's
I was thinking, well, maybe they had a lantern on this thing, but that doesn't really make sense because it's windy. So, good call, David. Did he see them? I don't know. I don't think so. Really, I think he saw them with a spiritual sense.
it would almost have to be because he's all knowing.
Yeah, this would be an
I
example.
wasn't trying to make light of things. But
No.
he just-
Hey, I'm all about it. But no, I think you're right. This is an example of the, Kenny, what's that word? Kenosis? Okay. He knows all while still being human. It's an attribute of God. He's all knowing, but yet he's in human form. And for some reason in this scenario, he divined, he knew without being in the human range to know. We don't know why, just is. And he's God. He can do that.
Well, the Psalms, it talks about the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous.
Ooh,
So
okay.
I believe does God see all that we do?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even in
He's
the
God. I believe he actually saw them. Now, whether he looked from the shore and looked out there, or he just had his supernatural binoculars on, or you know, looked it up on his laptop or whatever he did, you know. Actually saw what was going, because he knows his sheep, and he's always
Yeah.
watching his sheep,
Yeah.
no matter where they're at.
Yeah. So he knows. Practical application number 2. He sees you even when he's not right beside you. Do I need to elaborate on that point? Now, here's something that's a little more distressing. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them. He watched them struggle for a bit. And he did nothing. Practical application number 3. You will struggle, and the Lord will watch.
But if you have faith, you'll get through your struggle.
Practical application number 4, don't go ahead of me. You're right. But it is concerning, especially with younger Christians. We here are what I would consider more mature Christians, right? You've made time out of your day during a national gas shortage to come here, somehow, wait 40 minutes in line at $3.19 a gallon, come down here and read about the Word of God. That's how important it is to you.
Amen.
Younger Christians may have the idea that, oh, well, God will just take care of me. It's not necessarily the case in that sense, because we have 2 different senses of taking care of. We know that God will take care of us in the end. But in this life, we will have trials and tribulations. And we know that we are supposed to rejoice in those, Paul says. And while we don't fully understand it, we know that that is the Lord's will. The younger people, the people that we're mentoring, haven't necessarily arrived at that point. So we need to be cautious when we say things like, it'll be all right in the end, or it'll be okay, or just pray and the Lord will take care of you. While what we're saying is true and we understand it, practical application number 5, we understand things in a sense that they don't, and we can confuse them. We don't want to, verse 52, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. Jesus knew, right? Jesus is God. He knew what he was doing. We should try not to confuse people, right? Jesus is setting up a lesson here, or even like last week, we talked about there's so many different layers of things going on. Like we could extract many different lessons from many different areas from the feeding of the 5,000. We can do the same thing here. You will struggle, and Jesus will watch. We'll come to the point where he comes to us and rescues us, but we're not there yet. We want to build up that foundation for those who are not at that spiritual maturity point yet. Because they will go through these trials and they'll be like, man, this God isn't so good, right? Where's God when I needed him? I've heard that before, right? So let's not get ahead of ourselves. We should mentor to those with our experiences, right? The ways we got through difficult times, and it seemed like God wasn't there, and then, oh, God was there, I just didn't see it at the time, right? That's how we grew. We help others grow. Now look at what Jesus does. So he waits a bit. He lets them struggle. And these are experienced fishermen, by the way, and Jesus told them to go this way. They start going, and the wind comes against them. It's kind of a jerk move, really. But he's teaching them a lesson. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them. So still, there's probably a little bit of daylight, right? You're starting to see that sun crack against the sky. And he went out to them walking on the lake. We'll come back to that. He was about to pass them. Okay, let's pause right here. He wasn't walking to them, right? He was walking beside them, right? He just, I can imagine, right? If you're imagining like Friends, the TV show, and you've got like the laugh track in the background, right? Imagine you got these big burly guys, and they're rowing, and here comes Jesus just walking on by, right? And you hear the laugh track, ha 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 ha. That's how I imagine it. I'm a little strange though. Like, what is going through Jesus' mind? He's walking beside him. Well, and of course they imagine, right? You've been rowing. You look over to your side and you just see this figure, right? We laugh. We read, they thought he was a ghost. Well, yeah, you would have too, right? Put yourself in. It is not right for people to be walking on water.
Right.
Now, I have heard a few different naturalistic explanations for this phenomenon. Just like you remember last week we talked about natural explanations of how the bread was multiplied and how people try to get around this miracle. Well, they do the same thing here. Most common are, well, Jesus wasn't walking on the water. He was walking, by them on the shore. Well, that doesn't make any sense because A, they're 3 miles in the middle of this thing and they saw him like he was next door. That doesn't make any sense. And if you read the text, that's not what it says. So let's throw that out of the way. The second one is, well, he was walking on a sandbar. And that's I like that idea, right? It's terrible, but of the ideas proposed, it's the better one because we've been out in the ocean and you know that as you get 100, 200, 300 yards out, sandbars kind of form, and they form in the middle of nowhere, right? And you can go out there and you can be ankle deep and fish. That's cool. Still a terrible idea because A, they're 3.5 miles out into this lake. They're experienced fishermen. I think they would have known if they were on top of a sandbar. And it says he was walking on water, right? Walking is not sloshing through water, right? It's walking. Like, here's the top of the water, here's the bottom of his feet. It's not under, right? The text says he was walking on water. So it doesn't agree with the text. There's been some other crazy theories. It got so cold with the wind that it flash froze and he was walking on sheets of ice. Depends on how far you want to stretch your imagination, right? I don't think that happened. I think even if it did, it would have been super slippery. I think they would have noticed ice on the waves. The most logical explanation of this is a miracle, right? And if we're coming after feeding the 5,000, where he's bending the universe to create something from nothing, this is a drop in the bucket comparatively, really, right? He didn't create anything here. He's just bending the rules a little bit. So I just throw that out there because I want to be complete, because you'll hear some of these things as you talk to people. Jesus didn't really walk on the water. I think it was David Blaine who actually did this illusion in a pool, and he had sheets of glass underneath the surface of the water. And it does look like he's walking on water. It's a pretty cool illusion. You can probably find it on YouTube. But it's in a pool with a lot of setup, and it has to be pretty still for the effect. Because if you have a bunch of wind, the ripples on the water don't look the same over this much of glass, right? It doesn't. But anyway, it's kind of neat. I think the disciples would have noticed that being so close, but you'll hear these things as you go through. Yes.
Matthew records it as this when Peter walked on the water. Now between the boat and
Okay.
Jesus, Peter takes off walking, Jesus is close enough to reach down and grab him. So if Jesus was on a sandbar, Peter would have been too, and he couldn't sink.
It's a good point, and I didn't bring that up because it's not in Mark.
Right, I know.
Why? Let's follow this rabbit for a second. You would think, right? Mark just leaves that part out, but don't you think like somebody else hopping out of the boat and walking on water for a second, at least a second, before they sink, that's noteworthy? It's not here. Remember, who wrote Mark? Mark was a follower of, go back to the beginning, starts with a P.
Oh,
Peter. Okay? So it seems like Peter would have just left that convenient fact out about himself. Maybe he was embarrassed because he sank like a rock. Or maybe it's because he had a little bit of humility. And he didn't want to be like, well, I'm the guy who had so much faith, I jumped out of the boat and followed my Savior. He had a little bit of humility. Now, if that's the case, that's a very changed man, because that is not Peter's personality before Jesus' crucifixion. Peter was, let's do it. We'll chop off his ear and we'll think about the consequences later kind of guy. Right? Conveniently left that part out. And I think, some people be like, well, that shows that the Gospels don't really agree with one another. Well, I think that's just a personality, right? Maybe he grew as a person and just wanted to leave that part out of it. Mark was following Peter. So if Peter never said it, Mark wouldn't have wrote it down. So in a way, they agree in a more human way than maybe as an official autobiographer would have. So, good point. Thank you for bringing that up, Kenny. I was about to zoom right over that. When they saw him, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out, verse 50, because they all saw him and were terrified. It is what it says. They saw a man walking beside them in the middle of the night, in the middle of a lake. They were terrified. At least they're honest. They're not like, well, they were scared. And you would be too. I would be too. I'd be screaming like a little girl. Ah, But look at what it says. This is probably one of the most interesting verses in the Bible. Immediately he spoke out to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. And in my Bible it has semicolon, their hearts were hardened. I had David's face, right, when I was studying this. What? These are the disciples. We've heard this. We've heard these words before. Their hearts were hardened. It talks about the Israelites. It talks about Pharaoh's hearts being hardened. It talks about some of the rulers, not emperor, Pharisees, right? Talks about using that same language for the disciples. Practical application number 6. You can be with Christ in the presence of the Lord and still have your heart hardened. And that should be a sobering thought for all of us. And these weren't just people hanging around with Jesus. These people were following Jesus, living moment by moment. At this point, probably 2.5 years into his ministry. These weren't strangers. Their hearts were hardened. They did not understand about the loaves. Well, we have to answer the question. What is it that we're supposed to understand about the loaves?
That's my question.
Well, Robert, that was more for the audience to answer.
It provided for the people. And maybe these people in the boat thought they were going to die anyway. And like, they probably looked at Jesus as like, where you been? We've been frightened, you know?
Okay.
So maybe they were hardened because they thought he didn't show up to help them,
So
you know, soon enough. 'Cause they
Ah.
were all scared.
I like that. So where you been, Jesus?
Where
right?
you been, you know?
Right? You're leading this operation. You're leaving us hanging. Okay. I like that. I mean, there's probably a touch of that too. I like that. What else? What else can we come up with? What about the loaves? It's all about the bread.
Well, that was a miracle. That was a miracle, what
So-
he did
It
for
was.
that many people.
That many
How
people.
did that happen, you know?
Mm-hmm.
How could he have done that, but he did?
Yeah. No magic trick in the world is going to feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish.
They should have had a lot of faith in him, is what they should have had.
They didn't have any faith,
Mm-mm.
or very little faith. They must have had some faith.
Yeah.
I mean, they did follow his commands, and Peter did, for a brief second, actually walk on water. I mean, if faith of the mustard seed could move a mountain, then Peter's faith would have been like an atom, right? I mean, he made it for a second, which is more than what I've done. I've tried to walk on water, and it hasn't happened yet. I've tried running. I've tried walking slowly. You know, maybe it's just me. You're beside the pool, beside yourself, and you're like, I wonder if, right? And you're not going to get hurt because you just, you're going to fall to the bottom, right? Run, step. Hasn't happened yet. Water just doesn't work that way. So what about the loaves? Let's keep going down this thought. This is the key. This is the key.
Bread of life.
Bread of life, okay. But even that term is symbolic, right? We're trying to, with that term, is trying to convey something to us about Jesus, about his mission. What is it? What is it? Bread of life? But then, what does it say? That man cannot live on bread alone? Kind of got like mixed signal there. Come on. Let's keep going.
Is the breaking of the bread more symbolic about what is to happen?
Maybe. What do you mean? Where are you going with that, David?
The death on the cross, the breaking of the bread.
Breaking of the bread, like,
My body that is broken.
well, I mean, he says it right there at the Last Supper. This is my body to be broken for you, right? And he breaks the bread. I think he's not being subtle there because their hearts are hardened, right? They're dense. These guys are dense. Practical application number 7, we are dense too.
But is he trying to show them what's to come?
I think so.
Is to come.
I think so. I think you're right. When we explored last week that breaking of the bread, he's creating bread out of nothing, right? And he's passing it out to the people. I think we have a vision there, a symbolism of the Holy Spirit to come. Now, this is Clint talking. Feel free to disagree. But I think you have this idea of the Spirit being passed around the people. At the same time, right, on a different level, right, we talked about looking at the Bible as like a multifaceted jewel, right? It's one thing, but it has so many different viewpoints to it, right? You could look at this face and you could turn it and see this. on another face of this, we can see Jesus' sacrifice, that body being broken for you and for me. I definitely agree. What else? This is the key. This is the key here for this whole section before we get to chapter 7. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. They were amazed. Let's follow this thought. They were amazed at what? That he walked on water?
That the winds died down?
That the winds died down when he came in the boat?
All of the above.
But what, let's look back. What does it say that they were when he fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish? It doesn't say anything. What should have happened is they should have been amazed when he fed these 5,000 people. And then they should have been like, oh yeah, Jesus walking on water. Yeah, no big deal.
No big deal like that.
Right? That's the way it should have been, but it's not. Because they didn't understand about the loaves. They didn't understand that he could bend the universe at will. They didn't understand that he could provide for them with nothing. Although he required a little bit of faith, a little bit of, show me what you got.
Well, they were so dependent on him, and they didn't think on their own.
Well, they thought, it says, send them away, Jesus. That was their thought,
Oh,
right? Get rid of these people. We ain't got no food for them.
yeah.
Jesus' thought was a bit better. They didn't understand that. They didn't understand that he was Lord. That's really what we're coming down to. They did not understand that he was God. All right, quick review. Jesus drives out an impure spirit. Jesus heals many. Jesus heals a man with leprosy. Jesus forgives and heals a paralyzed man. Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus heals on the Sabbath. The parable, lots of teaching. Jesus calms the storm. Jesus restores a demon-possessed man. Jesus raises a dead girl. But they're amazed that he can walk on water. That's just the highlights. They're dense. Practical application number 8, we are just like them. We are just like them. How many times have we gone through our lives and seen the miracles that God can achieve by himself or through us, and every time we are amazed when he does something else.
Yep.
Just like him. Jesus had compassion on him. But notice, he let him sit for a while, and he walked beside them. They had to acknowledge him first. He was giving them an opportunity, is what he was doing. He was going to walk beside them and see what they did. And then once they called out to him, he came over. There is some imagery here from the Old Testament. You remember when Moses was conversing with God? I think it was either at the burning bush or maybe shortly thereafter, where he's conversing with God, and Moses says, let me see your glory, right? And God's like, no. You will die if you see my glory. But I think he turns him around, or I will put my hand over you, and I will pass by you, and you will see my back. And that you can sustain, right? It's like you cannot see my full glory as I go by. You can't handle it. There's some imagery here. Jesus is passing by, but you can't see my full glory. Not yet. Now, in the Old Testament, God does pass by. And Moses is, I think it says he glowed or something. In this case, the glory comes over to rescue. And that's pretty powerful imagery in of itself. He's there to help. They didn't understand. The loaves provided food. But all these people went away. If you feed people food, physical food, but they don't understand spiritually, what's the point? And that's what it says. Their hearts are still hardened. They're still hardened,
That's true.
right?
Yep.
So practical application number 9, eat all you want to, but it ain't going to do you any good in the long run if you don't understand the truth about God. I'll leave it at that. Right? You have to understand about the loaves. Jesus is Lord. Now, again, we have the benefit, right, of the rest. And we're getting on to him a lot. But if me and you were in the same situation, we'd do the same thing. Because we're dense. Practical application number 11.
What happened to 9 and 10?
I thought I did 9 and 10.
Did 9, but you didn't do 10.
Practical application number 10. We're skipping to 11. Practical application number 11. Let's not be hard on others when they're dense, because the disciples lived with Jesus and didn't get it until the very end. Okay? People make mistakes. Christians make mistakes. And Christians are the most judgmental people on the face of the planet. Well, second to the Jews. But we're related. Now, let's have a little grace with each other. If the disciples didn't get it, it's going to be hard for anybody to get it. All right? And we didn't get it the first time either. So let's simmer down with our high and mighty selves.
Well, yeah, because see, we have an earthly emotion. And spiritual emotion is totally different than an earthly emotion to me. That's probably why they didn't have, believed in him, because they're earthly back then. They're on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is really spiritual too.
Yeah, so Jesus is
It's kinda
fully
hard to
man
put them both together
and fully
sometimes
God,
when you're,
right?
When you're frightened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Paul talks about, like, we are fighting our flesh all the time, and we're looking through a glass dimly, right? It says, well, the disciples' glass was super dim, right? Like they're looking through like welding goggles. We're looking through very dark
I can
sunglasses.
see how we're so dense. I
Yeah,
understand
yeah, we
that.
are
Yeah,
dense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we are.
Is it because that man always tries to find other answers than what the answer really is? Or is it just totally something else?
Well, I think we can definitely relate to that today, especially with the science that has come along, and we see so much that science has done for us. And science is the study of the material world. And for sure, God has created the material world, and we've done amazing things with it. We have electricity. We have gasoline. The pews that you're sitting on were hewn and carved and cut, right? Great thing. But it's no surprise, I think, that we see, well, let's look to science for the answers. I think that's total. And even without science, it's not like they weren't looking for answers in other places anyway. The Greeks had the oracle. They would have their gods that they would go and pray, or they would visit the oracle to get some divine answer. Yeah, man always has a temptation to look anywhere but God for the solution. For sure.
There's always challenges out there.
Yeah, there's always challenges out there. For these guys, it was the wind. For us today, it's finding gas to get down here. It's paying the electric bill.
Well, a lot of times our human nature too is that we can always solve it ourselves,
Yeah,
and that's right way.
That's a great point. We can solve it ourselves. I know I am, as Paul said, the chief of all sinners. I totally do that a lot. I want to solve it myself, and it's very humbling when you can't. I know when I was going through my stomach issues, I was like, well, I can't solve it, but I pay good money for my health insurance, so go to them and let them solve it. And they couldn't. Mm-hmm. Hey, that was a wake-up call right there. I look back at that, and that was a growth opportunity for me. It really was. And it was years of rowing against the wind. Practical application number 12. This applies to you too. A couple questions from online that I missed. How and when did their hearts become unhardened? Anonymous, that comes a little bit later. I think it's in chapter 9 or 10, but I'm not sure. But we haven't got there yet, but it does come. And for doubting Thomas, it actually comes after his resurrection. So we say they, it's all the disciples here. And then the second question is, what's the difference, if any, of a hardened heart and being oppressed? Okay, that's a good question, because he uses the same language here for the disciples as well as the Pharisees. So there's a similarity here, but at the same time there's a difference. The Pharisees never walked on water, right? The Pharisees are not his chosen people. When Jesus deals with his disciples, he's giving it to them in a corrective way. We're going to see in chapter 7, if we get there tonight, which maybe we won't, chapter 7, he's going to rail on the Pharisees again. He's going to rail on them. And he's going to say, he's basically going to say, you of unclean spirit, right? You hypocrites. He's going to deal with them very harshly. So there is a difference between those, I want to say chosen, but I don't want to go into predestination tonight. Those followers of Christ and those who not. We're both hard. We're both hard of hearts. We're both dense. But one of us is one of us has made a choice to follow. I saw a, what do you call it? A license plate. Because this is where I get my theology from. I saw a license plate that says, I'm not perfect, just forgiven. That's it. It's really different. Now the Holy Spirit inside of us allows us to do great and mighty things. But as far as a person, Clint is still hard at heart. Right? So great question. I like it a lot. I hope that answers it. I do have the questions now up on my iPad. I was on the wrong screen. I was staring here. I'm like, man, nobody's asked a question. But I was in the wrong spot. Well, let's finish up. We've got a few minutes. Does everybody understand what the loaves were about? They didn't understand Jesus was Lord. That's the basic. Lots of lessons that we can apply from it. And we explored some of those tonight, right? But does everybody, that's the key that I want to get across tonight. Jesus is Lord. And you can be right beside him, bending the rules of the universe. And your heart is so hard. Your heart is so hardened, you may not know it.
Can I say something right there?
Yes.
And am I gonna mess you up?
No.
Maybe you same wavelength, but he is Lord.
Hmm?
But all the reason for the miracles was to prove that he was who? God. Man, and I equate this to, a lot of times as a pastor, I've seen here A lot of people, and I don't mind, I think it's great, a lot of people want the pastor to come pray with me. Or I need the pastor. God is saying, you need me. See, they understood the prophets. Elisha had a barrel that never ended with food. They've seen miracles of prophets, and they obviously knew who Jesus was and thought he was a great teacher, preacher, and possibly a prophet. But what their heart was hardened against, they didn't acknowledge him as God himself. Not just Lord, but God. God is with us.
Yeah.
And that's what they couldn't see. That God would actually want to come and be involved with what I'm doing on a daily basis. And that's something I want people to understand. Preachers love to be there. I love to pray with you. But God wants the same for you that I want. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I just look at that as they look more at Jesus as, he's a good prophet, good teacher, but it never crossed their mind, wow, we're seeing God make all this bread. The very word of God. And you said it a while ago, man does not live by bread alone, but every word that breatheth out of the mouth of God. God's right there with them, and their hearts are hard. They don't see it for nothing.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Kenny, for bringing that out. That brings me up to another point that is about to zoom by.
There's no life lesson.
Not yet, but maybe. Verse 50. Because they all saw him and were terrified, immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." Now this is also a reference back to the Old Testament. Moses is talking with God. Basically, what's your name? What do I call you? He says, I am. I am. That's what Jesus is saying here. I am. It is I am. If you actually, I don't know, I wish I had another translation with me. Some of them will actually translate that word. It is I. But really, in the Greek, it would be like, I am. He tells them. He basically spells it out for them right there. They missed it. Probably because they're so busy being afraid. Practical application number 13. During your fear, you can miss the identity of God in your life. So it did lead to a life lesson.
And Peter did confess in Mark chapter 8, thou art the Christ.
Okay, Mark chapter 8, Anonymous. I must have flipped right past it. Because I know it's coming up soon. Who do you say that I am?
Right.
That's when we start understanding. Right. Which is a great literary device because it's about halfway through the chapter. Or halfway through the book. We have created the plot and it's ascended. And now we're going to come down into the crucifixion and then we're going to ascend again. But we'll come to that. Very good. They did not recognize that Jesus was God. Now let's finish up. Verse 53, when they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. I'm going to go with that. And anchored there. And as soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. Now this isn't a surprise, right? Because he's already drawn crowds from all over the place. Here we go again. We can't get any rest. You had us rowing at midnight, Jesus, and now we're coming up. They've got to be getting a little testy at this point, right? As soon as they got out of the boat, they recognized Jesus. 55, they ran throughout the whole region, carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he went, villages, towns, or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. The marketplaces being the center of town where the disciples would walk through, right? Because they're coming through towns to talk to people, and of course that's where people hung out during the day, right? So it makes sense. Begged them to even let him touch the edge of his cloak. Not even touch him, just his garment. And there is another story related to that in another gospel, not mentioned here, where the lady is weaving her way through the crowds and she's like, if I can just touch his garment, right? And she does, and Jesus sees it, senses it, right? And she's healed. These people have faith. They don't know in what yet, but they have faith, and all who touched were healed. And Jesus knows this. He willingly goes into this. He is compassionate, right? He says it before. They're like sheep without a shepherd. He understands. That's what he's setting up, his kingdom, to give these sheep a pasture and a shepherd. But notice, he has to separate them. Verse 47, right? He sends the disciples away. He sends the crowds away. Now is not the time to stay together, right? They could have sat, think about it. They could have sat and ate bread forever, literally forever with Christ. And they'd been perfectly fine. That's not now. That is later, right? We will be in the presence of Christ forever later. But right now, we have got to solve this sin problem. And that means that we are sometimes separated from Christ. Practical application number 14, sin messed all this up. But go back to Genesis 1. And with that, we are done with the chapter. Any closing thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, heresies?
I got another practical application.
Okay, practical application 15 from Kenny.
I don't know what number you want to give it. But it was interesting to me that when Jesus was walking on the water, and Mark makes a point to say, and he would have passed them by, pretty much. I mean, he's just walking and just, yeah, I'm going.
Yeah.
Until they cried out. And he did it again in a village. He came through a village, and he was going to just walk on through the village. But the people of the village cried out to him and said, stay, teach us. And so he did. He stayed, he taught, he healed. I relate that to James 4, and he says, you have not because you ask not.
Mm-hmm.
Good application. A lot of times, God's just sitting there patiently waiting. If you'll just ask me.
Practical application 16. Ask. Don't ask for a Ferrari. It's not what we're talking about. God says, ask for wisdom, and he will give it. Ask. I was talking with somebody who was desperately searching for Christ, wanting to know if he's real, and examining all these other religions. And I told him, I was like, look, all you have to do is ask. Just ask God. Show me that you're real. Show me something in my life. And I told him, be prepared for an answer. And it's true. And apparently he did answer. He was saved shortly thereafter.
Amen.
But ask. So I totally agree with you. But prepare for the answer. Yeah. Anything else before we close? All right. Well, we finished chapter 6. Next week we will start on chapter 7. Great stuff there too. I was already ahead and looking into it, and so many things to come through. Maybe we can finish Mark this year. I don't know.
Are you going to be here for chapter 7 and 8?
I will be. Before we
wanna
close,
be prepared.
I have 1 week-long trip in July, and we will probably just break for that 1 week. We're going to go see some family in Florida, just a week. No big deal. And then we're talking about a longer trip in August, but it's not finalized yet, and I'm not sure if it's going to happen. So, but I should be here. Thank you for your concern. So, with that, let's pray and close out. Father, thank you for this opportunity to come here and study your word. I thank you for the sacrifice that these people have made to come and hear your word, and to put aside the worries and needs of the world, to prioritize you in their lives. I pray that you bless them. I pray that you give them wisdom and guidance as they go through the world. And I pray that you open their hearts. Let our hearts not be hardened, but be softened to apply your word and to have it take root in our hearts, and so we can live our lives for you, Lord, and share the gospel with everybody that we come across. These things I ask for in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, that was a
Thank you.
good lesson.
May the Lord bless you with gasoline as we go along.